Rabbi Tovia Singer, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Sure. I live in Jerusalem, so we must be 7-8 hours apart. And I am a rabbi, and I've devoted my life to helping Jewish people in the church return back to the Jewish faith. I moved to Israel from Indonesia a little more than 3 years ago. I've written a few books on this topic, and it's been very exciting work.
Cool. I am an atheist, by which I mean I believe that all of the evidence and things we see are best explained by a naturalistic universe. Could you tell me some of the reasons you believe that there are for belief that there is a God?
Sure. One favor, your audio, for whatever reason, is coming in very low for me, and I don't know if you can do anything on your end about that.
It does. I think it's my gain thingy is low for some reason. I need a new gain thingy. So it's one of my technological issues. I can just move closer to the mic. That could possibly work.
Yeah, that's all right. I hear you. We're going to be okay. So, the Judaism is a story not just about our faith, but it's about my people. The Jewish people are very unusual for a whole bunch of reasons. One of them is that we're an ethno-religious group. We're a nation and a faith. You won't find that in other religions. Islam, Christianity are faiths, and while they began in certain areas of the world, and those two Abrahamic religions based themselves on Judaism, Judaism is an outgrowth of a history of our people. I'm a Kohen. My great-great-grandfather is Aaron, the brother of Moses. So we've had a very long history, and throughout that history, God interacted in a very unique way with the children of Israel. And that possibly explains why the vast majority of the world, they may not be crazy about us, but they think that our central core document, the Torah, is a holy book. The revelation at Mount Sinai, which is the core formidable event in Jewish history, was not God speaking to somebody personally or an angel appearing to somebody upstate New York or 8 people, but rather an entire nation experienced the revelation. We didn't have to trust anyone. Moreover, the events leading up to the revelation at Mount Sinai were part of Jewish history. It was my people that endured slavery in Egypt. It was my people that witnessed together as a nation miracles on a national scale and experienced the Exodus. And it is that national experience that's completely unique in the world. And the Torah itself makes this a point. In chapter 4 of Deuteronomy, the Torah tells us that, in fact, think back. It asks you, the reader, to all times that have gone past from one end of the world to the other. Has any other nation had such a national revelation? Has any other people even claimed such a thing? And the author of this book says that no other nation will ever make such a claim. This is completely unique in history. Search from one end of the world to the other. Has any other nation ever heard the voice of God as you have and lived? So it is based on that national experience through a wilderness, coming to the land of Israel, in experiencing some of the greatest men and women that have ever lived, the prophets of Israel. That's a part of our history. And experiencing the first temple, the revelation, and then, as predicted, the exile into Babylon, and then the building of the second temple. So all of Judaism is not just sort of a belief like you might wonder, should I believe in any religion out there? It's a part of our national consciousness. And it is passed down from father to son. So the Torah could very easily say to you that if anyone comes to you and says you should believe in any gods that your fathers did not know, do not listen to that person. And it can make that claim. No other holy book can do that. Only the Hebrew scriptures can do that because it's speaking to a nation of witnesses, Isaiah 43, verse 10. And therefore, the children of Israel called on to be a light to the world. And we are told in this holy book that about the events that will happen. That's a highly falsifiable claims are expressed in the Hebrew Bible. Very unique. And here we are today, returned to Jerusalem. The miracles of our history are there for the world to see. I think I've not spent too much time being a Gentile, but I think that we're a polarizing group, meaning if we did a thought experiment and we stood on the streets of any major city in the world, Brussels, Miami, Chicago, New York, London, Manchester, Jakarta, and ask people, what do you think about the Jews? We'd very likely, the only rule in a thought experiment is the people would have to say what they really think. So people would generally say, I really like the Jews or I really don't like them. We're people that elicit very strong feelings about the Jews, about Israel. And we don't find that about other nations. So we're very unique in the world. And the Torah talks about this. People will bless you, people will curse you. In you, all the nations will be blessed. But Judaism, our faith, is a part of our national reservoir, our national consciousness, our national experience. And that's the foundation of our faith.
You mentioned that there was a claim that only Judaism made, that no other nation heard God or something along those lines. What do you mean by that? Because I think there are many nations who have claimed to have seen visions of gods. I mean, the most recent I've heard of was Christopher Columbus, when he came to Americas, asked the Native Americans to give him tributes and plants and things. And he said, if you don't do this, in 2 weeks' time, the moon will turn blood red and disappear. And that's my God is just so much more powerful than your gods. It's doing this. We know that wasn't because of God. He just knew the science behind the eclipse. But from the American Indians' perspective, they definitely thought they had a sign from God, and that it spoke to them as an entire people in that one instance. So why would that be any different than the case of Judaism?
Right. So that's one of the ways we know that Christopher Columbus was, trying to be polite here, was a really nasty fellow, because he knew very well what was going to happen in the celestial bodies, and he exploited the Native Americans, who we now call the Native American Indians, to get the response or the result that he wished. But one thing, Christopher Columbus, we could say that the person was a bastard, and he was, but we cannot say he was stupid. So this is what Christopher Columbus would not say to them and didn't say to them. You should know that this will never happen again. Moreover, Christopher, because he knew that if he could do it, somebody else down the pike can do it. If anybody else could do, it's not just a national revelation, it's hearing the voice of God. It's not just pointing to a celestial phenomena, which people can do, but it's literally hearing Anochi Hashem Elokecha Asher Hotzesicha Me'eretz Yisrael mibeis avodim. I am the Lord your God, who took you out of bondage, out of Egypt, to freedom. Lo yeh lecha Elohim acherim al panai. Shall have no other gods upon my face. We hear the words of God, and our nation was transformed. Our behavior, we have devoted our lives to Hashem because of an intimate connection. So it's not like kind of a magic trick, or, as you said, knowing, some celestial phenomena, some eclipse that was going to occur, and then exploit that. But it's hearing the voice of God. Moreover, when the children of Israel came to Mount Sinai, They had left Egypt 7 weeks earlier. They've passed through a sea that had parted for them. So there were miraculous experiences for the entire nation that they had endured in their hope for freedom. And it's that basis that all of Judaism is founded on, and everything else we believe in is based on, number one, that God revealed to himself to us at Mount Sinai. And I think one other thing should be said, Tom. Banks make a lot of money. It's very evident, not that I check their books, but when you walk the streets of New York, LA, San Francisco, London, banks have huge buildings, very valuable real estate. They're making a lot of money loaning money, right? If you can get, I don't know what the interest rate is, but if you can get the interest rate that banks can get, you'd be able to build buildings like that as well. But before a bank loans you anything, as much as they want to, they will ask you for your social security number. And then they're going to check your credit rating, right? And they want to make sure that you've paid the debts that you have made, the financial promises that you have made in the past. And based on that, they will then trust you, in a sense, have faith, but a highly informed type of faith, that if Tom has paid all his credit card debts in the past, paid his car loans in the past, then we can trust you in the future, that we can assume that it is very likely that we can trust you in the future. So there is another caveat to all of this, and that is the God of Israel is not coming out of nowhere, but he's made promises to us. And you'll notice something about the Jewish Bible. There isn't a lot of talk about heaven and hell that you find all over the Christian Bible, right? There's almost no mention of the afterlife in the entire corpus of the Jewish scriptures. Why? Because it's unfalsifiable. You can't test it, right? The Christian Bible says you're going to burn in an eternal lake of fire constantly. You're going to go to hell if you don't believe. And Christians frequently tell co-religionists that if you don't maintain this belief, you're going to burn in hell. But you never hear Jews talk that way. Why? And it does work. It's a very successful method of scaring people, because people are frightened about what happens after you die. But you can't test it. So if you were God, Tom, and you were writing a holy book, and you wanted to convince people to commit to it, and you're really God, which means that you really can control the weather. If you're God, that'll be a minor miracle. If you're God, you really can control history. So here's what you would say if you're God. If you're God, you'd say, look, it's just going to stop raining, right? You're going to go into exile. How many years? 7 years. But I'm going to bring you back. Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 10. You're going to be exiled from the land, Leviticus chapter 26, Deuteronomy 28, but I will bring you back. It'll be many days, but one day you will come home. So God has this enormous amount of credibility with the children of Israel, and the miracle of the return of the nation to their land after thousands of years, an unprecedented event in history. God then has this amazing credit score with our people. So are there mysteries that we can't understand? This is true, but we can trust in the God of Israel. I think what you've just heard effectively encapsulates why the Jewish people are so committed, connected, attached to God in love and devotion and loyalty.
Well, first thing I'd say is if I was God and I was writing a book, I'd probably write something more similar to what was written in the Hindu text, where they said the age of the earth is 4.3 billion years old. I think giving a number of facts that correspond to reality that there's no way they could have known at the time would be very good evidence. In the case of prophecies, it seems like the prophecies, if they were very precise and accurate, like the Hindu prediction of the age of the earth, that would be good evidence. I would agree with you. But it seems like the vast majority of them are very vague and can be interpreted in a number of different ways. And I did want to ask if if Moses didn't exist, if he's a mythical figure, would that disprove Judaism?
Yes, completely. Just one point, because I don't want to move away from that little caveat. I think what you said is very valuable. No one's ever asked me that, and I just want to share this with you. If for a moment that the Torah will just contain scientific information that only now we know about in the last few decades, right? It wasn't that long ago that we thought the universe was much older or perhaps eternal. Imagine what that would mean. That would mean that for all of history, human history, no one would be able to test it out. The beauty of what is conveyed in the Torah is right now you can know that it stopped raining. Right now you can know that you'll be exiled. Right now you should know that the Assyrian Empire will penetrate Jerusalem, or I'll protect Jerusalem. The Torah has an immediacy. The Torah is telling you that certain acts is a cancer for you. It is of no use to the smoker to be told about a phenomenon that he would only discover long after he's dead. So the Torah is written so that people immediately at any point in history, Torah is not reserved for high IQ people and scholars, that any child can understand the message and who is behind the message. And that goes to the national revelation as well.
Oh yeah, I think that I wouldn't just give one prediction for hundreds of thousands of years in the future. That wouldn't be very useful. I would probably give predictions about things very recently in the past, present, and future, and so that there would be a consistent um, reification of the fact that this was a reliable text. So every new big discovery would be predicted in the Bible. So you will discover DNA is a double helix. You will discover germs cause disease. You will discover that the moon is 255,000 miles away. And so there'd be an incremental set of confirming predictions that you could verify, and they'd be very, very precise. The precision thing is what's important. To me, the prophecies in the Bible seem more like you will see a dog. It's like, well, yes, that's a very accurate statement. Like I will definitely see a dog eventually, but it's so common that that happens. It's not a very precise or spectacular prediction. It's a pretty common thing you're going to expect. Wars happen all the time, so predicting a war is going to happen is pretty commonplace, especially during that time period. So I would need something very precise for the prediction to be a confirmation of the text, and it'd have to be consistently correct, consistently concise, and very, very specific, because the specificity is really important in predictions. Because if you can interpret a prediction in 1,000 ways, that's the same as making 1,000 prediction, 999 of which are wrong. And so it's when I read the prophecies of the Torah, they seem very vague. They seem like you can interpret them in a number of different ways. Versus if I read the text of the Hinduism that says the Earth is 4.3 billion years old, because it gives a number, it just gives a set number of years. That's very precise, and I think that is a more accurate way to write if you were the creator of the universe.
Of what purpose? How? Imagine for a moment, Tom, that you and I can travel in a time machine and go back 3,300 years ago, which is when the Torah is given at Mount Sinai. And imagine we would have a statement made about DNA without the equipment to be able to verify it. Imagine for a moment we were told 3,300 years ago that the age of the Earth was more than 4 billion years old. Imagine how stunned we would be to be able to measure, to falsify that. That would be that would be the worst thing I would submit. That would be the worst idea, because, of course, for us, with hindsight and all the leaps in science, for us it would be very beneficial. But for them, they would be lost. And Hashem cares deeply about every generation. Therefore, the revelation at that time was a national revelation. We really heard the voice of God. We were all there. You talk about DNA. Let's do that for a moment. I'm a Kohen. I'm a priest. There are nearly 1 million of us in the world. You can check, and this has been done at the University of Arizona and around the world. my DNA. I mean, that's a highly falsified claim. There are Kohanim, priests all over the world. We very specifically, we are the patrilineal descendants of Aaron, the high priest, the brother of Moses. Okay. So what you could do is you can actually take my DNA and find a Jew who I don't know in Manchester, go to meet another Jew in San Francisco, another in Spain, who's a priest, and test our DNA and ask the question, is there a common marker on our Y chromosome? Well, so if the claim of my people bears any resemblance to truth, if it maps onto truth, what we would expect to find is that, in fact, we have that marker, and we do. There's a tribe in Africa, Lumba tribe, Black men and women who look nothing like me. They have a tradition that they're not just Jewish, but they're the descendants of Aaron, priestly people. You can read all about them. The science has been done. We didn't know about them, but they had this claim for a very long time. We've tested their DNA. As you can imagine, what we'd expect to find, we discovered. They have that marker, the Y chromosome. So the beauty of Judaism is that it's something that could be tested at every stage of history. It's true, Tom, that many claims today we can look at will be very meaningful to us today, but have been meaningless to someone 3,000 years ago. And that's why when you ask, why is Judaism meaningful? I don't mean it's only meaningful in the year 2022, centuries after Galileo, but it was meaningful at every stage and turn of our rich history, and it will remain that way through our extraordinary destiny.
All right, I would agree that you wouldn't be able to write a holy book that only gives information that's relevant to one time period, but I think that you could write a holy book that had relevant information to every time period. And
Right.
you could have parts that people wouldn't understand at one time period, but they would come to understand in the future. And that would be fine. But I think that I would include those things because it seems like when we read the Bible today, it has no relevant information as far as I can tell. It doesn't tell us anything relevant about the world. Whereas if I was the creator of the universe, I would include things that would continue to be discovered throughout time. Artificial intelligence would be in there. Going to Mars would be in there. Those kinds of things we would expect to see confirmed. But I did want to ask about the genealogy thing because there's
About
the
what?
genealogy, the Y chromosome markers you mentioned.
Sure.
There are Y chromosome markers in every culture. Every culture of people has Y chromosome markers. Famously, I think Attila the Hun has Y chromosome markers of his lineage that cover like a quarter of the planet and like 70% of Asia, which is quite phenomenal. Interesting, at least. But I don't think that indicates, for example, that you are in a lineage specifically of like Moses or something. I think the consensus of historians is that Moses was a mystical figure, I believe. And so I don't think
consensus where?
Of academic historians and archaeologists who research the time period and the events of going on in that time period.
I mean, we're talking about my uncle. I mean, when people say that Aaron didn't exist and mythological, they're saying that my family, it didn't exist. And I don't think we want to do a head count, and theology is not a democracy. But I would posit to you that if we ask the vast majority of scholars of the Hebrew Bible, I mean, the overwhelming majority would say that Moses was a very important historical figure. The only thing is that it is true that in the secular academic world, which cannot, in its methodology, seek out spiritual things, it is true that you have a minimalist attitude, that they would come up with stuff like that. And I hope your viewers will recognize that it is at least striking that every claim of our people, of our history, is denied by significant swaths of the world who have some interest. And I'm not blaming people. I'm just saying that going back to Moses, to Abraham, there are folks who said that the Temple Mount in the Western Wall, there was no Temple of Solomon that stood there. There are people in the world who have said that the history of our people that occurred during World War II never happened. So we're used to people questioning and doubting, but it's not a good thing. I would just say this to the viewer, that they should reconsider their approach of scholars, because it becomes a kind of, I'm not trying to be obnoxious, but it becomes a kind of North Korea thing, because in the secular academic world, if you say, I believe that Moses existed and he was a lawgiver and was heard the voice of God, if you even say, I'll actually lower the bar, if you actually say that the book of Daniel was written by Daniel, they'll throw you out. They'll look at you like you're crazy. And they don't have the training that real Jewish scholars have. And they'll go, no, Daniel couldn't possibly have written Daniel, because after all, I mean, this is another conspiracy, that Daniel spoke about Antiochus Epiphanes, the king of the Seleucid Empire, the fourth. So, I mean, I hope that people are just, I don't know if I can convince you, but at least people should notice that there is a phenomena going on in the minimalist world to essentially cast doubt on almost every aspect of Jewish history until the recent. And I think that should give people pause. You can't prove that something didn't exist. You can prove something did exist. And if archaeology, you mentioned archaeology, so I'm just bringing, if archaeology was a hard science, and it isn't, then you would have a much greater consensus among archaeologists. But in fact, we find that archaeologists have a certain worldview. And if they have a certain worldview, you and I could predict what they're going to say about discoveries, because archaeology is like having a 1,000-piece puzzle, having only 2 pieces and no picture to work with. So that's why we can predict what archaeologists will say based on their worldview. And I think that we should, take this. I think people should at least take pause in saying that we don't know. And as far as DNA goes, what we find among the Jewish people is consistent with the fantastic claims made in the Torah. We're an eternal nation that cannot be destroyed. I mean, here we are, not even a century after 1/3 of my people were murdered in Europe during World War II. Like, what nation endured that? And there are people today who say that never happened. Well, we exaggerated that. So it is true there are certain circles that are minimalist circles. Maybe if Christians hadn't gone to war for 30 years during the 17th century, maybe the attitude towards religion might be different. I don't know. But our people are real, our history is real, and our destiny is something really very special and remarkable. We want the world to know about that.
Oh, I definitely agree. There are people out there who believe the craziest things. There are people who believe the world is flat. It's always an interesting position to take. But I think the reason professional academics, I don't think have the same bias that you're talking about. I remember Sam Harris was referencing the archaeologists in Israel who are Jewish doing research to try and find confirmation archaeological evidence of the Exodus, and they couldn't find anything. They just found nothing. And if the number of people who were said to have moved from Egypt during that time period had transitioned, we would see archaeological evidence of new homesteads being built in that location at a very massive rate. But that's not what we see. We see them coming along from a long, protracted, slow period of time. And we don't see any pots or evidence of 40 years in the desert of this 500,000 at least people, 1/2 to 2 million people in the desert for 40 years. No archaeological evidence of that whatsoever. And if that population was so massive, it would have been about 1/3 of the entire population of Egypt at that time, if it was true. And there just wasn't enough food to even support that. There's so many facts that seem to contradict the scientific evidence we have about the time period that I think most scholars, including Jewish and Christian scholars, agree when looking at the archaeological and textual evidence that Moses probably didn't exist and was probably a story built upon to convey more figurative meaning to the people. And I think it's not just like they just don't believe because of bias. They're like flat earthers or Holocaust deniers who are just completely ideologically biased. But it seems like there's a lot of very good evidence that seemed to convince me that these stories were more about conveying meaning to the people and giving ideas, kind of like American Indian stories about how their gods interacted with the people at the time period. But I don't think those actually happened, or with how Thor interacted with people.
So this date that we happen to be having this conversation, Tom, marks the 15th anniversary of when Israel bombed and destroyed the Syrian nuclear reactor in an amazing raid. Going back to 2002, the Jewish state discovered that Syria was building a nuclear reactor with the help of North Korea. And for 5 years, the Jewish state gathered more and more evidence that it was because Syria tried to mask what they were doing, tried to use a plane building. They knew what Israel had done to the Osirak reactor years earlier. But Israel had gathered all the intelligence that they needed. That information was shared with the administration of your country. And then in the summer of 2007, Israel, using, I think it was less than 30 planes, dropped 22 tons of explosives on the building and destroyed it within a matter of minutes using a corridor going through Turkey, and then came back. And one of the things that's very striking is that Syria didn't say a word about it and still won't. Why? Because it was a defeat for them. They were embarrassed by it. I concede this point to you, that an empire such as Egypt would not have written about their defeat. In the past, nations did write about their history. Sometimes we're really lucky because they, instead of putting it on papyrus or vellum, they actually chisel it into a stone or a piece of metal so it remains to this day. But they bragged about their successes and their conquests, not about their defeats. So, again, what we're asking is, the question is, what we encounter today, the information, what has been written, recorded, is that consistent with the Torah or not? When we look at the DNA of somebody like me, and I could predict that you can study the DNA of someone I've never met in my life who lives in Melbourne, Australia, I could predict that we have a Y chromosome that matches so closely that it can date when our common relative lived roughly 3,300 years ago. Now, I grant you, that's why I use the example of a lending institution, that if you, Tom, apply for a credit card and you have a great credit score, of course, the lending institution does have to put their faith in you. There is some faith, and they try to limit their risk, that you might have paid all your debts in the past, but you might mess up in the future, for sure. So, of course, we do trust this, but it's a massive amount of evidence. But it is true. I want to concede all this. It's not the evidence that you're looking for, because the Torah is not a medical book. It's not a science book. It's a book where God tells us about how we should live, what he wants from us, information that we would otherwise not have access to. And God tells us this is what would happen to you during your history. Take a look. No, I'm not going to talk to you about the resurrection of the dead. And it's true. I would not expect Syria in the recent past discussing its defeat, or ancient Egypt in the very far past talking about its defeat. So that's what we're looking for. But we are, I concede this point to you, that the nation of Israel, my people, my nation, we are walking witnesses. You are my witnesses. Witnesses to what? To the national experience and consciousness of our people, an unprecedented event in history where God revealed himself. Not said, look for a celestial sign in the sky. No, it's hearing the voice of God. It's not looking at the moon and looking at its color. No. It's passing on dry land through the sea. So that's our long history that we want to share with the world.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. I think that the history of the Jewish people is very profound and interesting, and as a culture is something that should absolutely be respected. But my only issue is when they claim to have this experience where God spoke to them. The first thing I want to ask, which I do for any question, is how do you differentiate reality from imagination? Because humans are very imaginative. We make up all kinds of things. There are tens of thousands of gods all over the world, and many people claim to have seen and spoken to the gods. And so I want to know: is this something I should believe, something I should trust in, have faith in?
Oh, your volume just went up. That was great, Tom.
Okay.
Whatever you did, just 1 second ago, your volume just went normal. So
Oh, I probably just changed position. Is that better?
whatever you did, that's great. That's
Okay.
great.
Yeah, I just moved the mic in front of my mouth. I think is the
All right.
solution.
There you go.
But so in the case of, like, do you believe that the historical descriptions in the Torah are accurate? Like that Moses, there were at least 500,000 men in Egypt that left Egypt, that they were in the desert for 40 years, that the chariots were crushed by the sea when it collapsed on them. Moses existed. Like all these things are factually accurate. You would,
As I said, Moses is my uncle. This is like
yeah.
there are people who are Levites. I'm a Kohen. I'm a priest. There are people who are Levites. That means they're from the tribe of Levi, but sent to Moses rather than Aaron. You could check their right. Yes, very much so. My uncle, which is my father's sister's husband, Charles, if you're watching, he's a Levi, so he's a direct descendant of Moses. Very real. The number of Jews that left Egypt, well, the number of men of military age was 603,550 men. And we can extrapolate if we take younger men, older men, women, children, probably was millions of people. Now, you go, well, that's really strange, but think about this. I just want to ask you this question. And I want to tell you that I don't know that I've done a lot of shows with atheists before, but I think we broached this. I'll just ask you the question. I mean, if there is a God, right, and he is the creator of the heavens and the earth, you know, and used a unique family with which to transmit that to the world, I would think that bring a nation of millions of people a few thousand years ago, 3,300 years ago, out of Egypt, and they would have a miraculous existence for 40 years in the wilderness and then cross the Jordan opposite Jericho. We know the exact place. I would think that's a minor miracle in the scheme of things. I would think like a more interesting miracle is like, how did you produce kangaroos? And like, how do you have these kangaroos have this pouch in the front where their not fully developed babies could continue to develop? I would go, that's, to me, really, that is very cool. I would think that, redeeming, the only thing that's unique about the redemption of the Jewish people is that it was a national experience. It's not take my word for it. It's not like you have to believe in Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, which in claims that are highly falsifiable because they're not consistent with Tanakh. But rather, what we find is consistent with what we're looking at, that, yes, this will be a very minor miracle in the course of what God could have done.
Oh, I would agree. I'm not questioning the power of God in this instance. What I'm questioning is, why did he erase all of the evidence that would have been there if it had happened? So like the Muslims
I'm
claim
not an
that,
I'm not an let me just say this to you. I'm not an archaeologist, and I don't know. Like I'm a diver. I'm a master scuba diver. I've been diving for many, many decades, right? And I've traveled through the Sinai into Egypt, diving some of the best reefs in the world. And I just don't know the answer to the question of if let's say skeletons were I mean, people died in these places. I mean, I've been there many times. It's an easy place to die in. It's just a desert, right? Just rock barren, right? So people did die in these places, and people lived there 3,300 years ago and died there, right? So let's say we found a bunch of skeletons in the Sinai. Would that strengthen my faith, or would that weaken your atheism? I don't think so. I wouldn't say, hey, there's a bunch, because you go, well, how do we know those are the same people as Israelites? I'm just saying that I don't think these are very strong things. I do think that when the Torah says that, one day I'm going to find you, I'm going to bring you home, you're going to be spread from one end of the world to the other. Nations will be impressed with your Torah, Deuteronomy chapter 4. All the nations will go, what a wise nation this is that has such a Torah, but you'll be spread from one end of the world to the other, and your wisdom will spread throughout the world, but you'll remain few in number. Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 27. And these are outrageous claims, but one day, after a very long exile, Hosea chapter 3, verse 4 and 5, I'm going to bring you home. Isaiah 43, I will find you. I will bring your sons from up the north and your daughters from the south. I will say to the furthest most islands, hold not back. I am bringing you home. And you're coming home to Jerusalem, and there you will be resurrected as a nation in the Holy Land. I will keep my promise, and I love you. Watch me. That's what the God of Israel is saying. He's saying, just watch me. Just watch what I'm doing in history. So instead of looking for a boneyard somewhere in a desert, we're a living testimony, and here we are after thousands of years. We're tired, but we're rejuvenated by what? By a promise that God made to our people, and we're a living relic. The Jewish people are a living relic of history. We're not a dead body or skeleton that someone would discover in a desert. We're a walking witness to the God of Israel, and we encourage the world to take notice of that. But based on the Torah, I didn't write it. The Torah is very specific about what it predicts, that everyone would know, not DNA and the distance of the moon to the earth, which no one would have had access to. I mean, please don't be offended, but like, what a worthless piece of information that would have been to my great-great-grandparents who knew nothing about that, had no way to measure that. What a more valuable way to convey and say, I'm with you. I'm with you at every step of the way. If you turn away from me, you're going to have at every stage highly predictable, highly falsifiable events that will occur, and even the worst events, Jacob's trouble in Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 7, the worst event in history will happen to you. The worst thing will happen. Umimeno yivoshea, but from it will come your deliverance to the land of Israel. These are really, really amazing things. And the children of Israel, I would submit, are remarkable people. Not I'm saying that as bragging, heaven forbid. I frequently don't feel that I don't say it's too strong that I don't deserve, but I feel humbled by the history of my nation. And yes, there'll be people who will claim that our history never occurred, but we're going to keep reaching out. We're going to do our best. I do my best to share that light, not by believe in me and be saved, but look at us, keep your eye on the ball, watch the promise.
Oh, right, but I don't think those are mutually exclusive. I don't think that if the creator of the universe could put both things that could help the people at the time period and also have scientific facts that showed that it had greater knowledge, you could have both of those things. I don't think it would be too difficult to include both useful facts for everyone to live by and also something to confirm its knowledge of the future. But I wanted to go back to when I read the Torah and say that there is this massive group of people who moved from one place to another, and we can go to that place and we can dig and we can see the houses and the number of houses and the number of settlements, and we can just count them because they stay there. That it's not old enough where the material would have deteriorated. We can actually just see all the buildings there, and we search and we don't find a massive influx of new buildings. It just doesn't exist.
We wouldn't expect to. I apologize. I don't mean to interrupt you. In the wilderness, there was a cloud that hovered over the people. It was a miraculous existence. The food we ate had no waste product to it. The mun, this food that came out of heaven caused no waste at all. That's exactly what we would expect. Now, I wouldn't dare go on air with you, Tom, and say you should believe it because mun does not produce waste. It's a perfect food. It's a heavenly food. I wouldn't do this. So please don't take it in that vein. But not that you're asking very interesting questions, really excellent. And you're not strawmanning me, not at all. So please don't take it in that vein. But you're kind of saying, well, we don't find the structures. Well, of course you don't find the structures because we live in Sukkot. That was the whole point. We didn't depend during those 40 years on any of the things that we would need to. You're right. If you and I would go to Hurghada in Egypt, amazing diving, right? We would need all kinds of infrastructure. And we'd really like to have running water and a bathroom and good food. But that's not the claim. The claim is that they had perfect food, and the claim is that they had Sukkot. So I'm not saying that should convince you, so please don't take it in that vein. However, huge caveat, we're not claiming that. It means the Torah is not making that claim. So therefore, don't expect to find it. There's a good reason why you won't discover. One other point, I just need to say this to you. We'll tell you what, you mentioned a moment ago that many of these archaeologists who are minimalists are Jewish and live in Israel. Well, I got news for you. Noam Chomsky is Jewish. Karl Marx was Jewish. Karl Marx was not a very religious Jew. Madoff was Jewish. He wasn't a Jew that I'd be proud of. Some of the greatest Harrison, who you mentioned earlier, Sam Harris, is Jewish. Right? Christopher Hitchens was a Jew, right? But you can't quote people who are atheists who don't believe any of this. I mean, I wouldn't, quote, people who are Irish. It doesn't make sense. I mean, just being a Jew, because we are a nation, of course there are Jews who have fallen out of faith, who don't believe it. I wouldn't, quote, Bishop Spong, who didn't believe in Jesus or didn't believe in the resurrection. I wouldn't say that to a Christian because, of course, there are Christian people who call themselves Christians who are not Christians. So we have to be careful about who are we appealing to. So there are, in fact, here in Israel, many archaeologists who would say, this is not my field. I have no expertise in this field, but I know many of these archaeologists say we have a load of evidence. It's not the kind of evidence that we would look for in the scientific world today, but there's a whole bunch of material that we'll find that points in the direction of the Exodus, and a whole bunch of people like Finkelstein, who's absolutely Jewish, who absolutely doesn't believe in anything, who absolutely is a minimalist, who say we don't. It's the same characters who are battling in the world of archaeology. It's not my field or my expertise. But you wouldn't find that in any other field. In the hard sciences, we wouldn't expect, to get a blood test at two different laboratories, and in one I happen to be O positive, thankfully, right? Well, that another laboratory would say that I had a different blood type. That would be very troubling. Why? Because that's a hard science. This is a soft science. It's just pointing in a direction. People have, and I know that people have a worldview. I have one. You have one. People have a worldview, and then they operate out of that worldview. And that's, I think, what we're seeing. But my love is for the scriptures, and my people have a great message to the world, and we're sharing that.
All right, so I would totally agree with you that we wouldn't expect to find Mon, and we won't expect to see the Egyptians writing about their great defeat. Totally agree with you on those. But would we also expect to see no pottery? Like I would expect, even in this case, that the Jews coming out of the Exodus would build pots and houses. I don't think they just lived on no houses, no structures of any kind. That seems strange. And I would expect that if the chariots,
if you found the relic of a hut, Tom, I'm just asking because I'm not fully grasping what you're asking. So I want to just make sure we're speaking the same language. So you're saying that if we discovered huts somewhere in this vast area that date back roughly 30 to the Bronze Age, that would affect your religious beliefs? Would it?
yes.
I don't know.
So
Really?
yes, because I've studied the archaeology of the time period, and if we look at the amount of huts, the amount of civilizations that are formed in the chosen land, where the Jews were supposedly moved to. We can check from before the Exodus supposedly happened and after the Exodus supposedly happened, and we see the
Where
rate
would
of
you
huts.
even look? Like where? I mean, where would you? All right, let me just concede this point to you because I just want to concede it to you because again, I have no way of like doing the research on air. I have no knowledge of archaeology. That's not my expertise. So I'll concede it all to you. There are people who do who. But it is not our claim that there's hope there. This nature of the sukkah, that's the word schach, were the anani hakavod, the clouds of glory. Now that's an absolutely fantastic claim, but to say we don't find structures when the Jews were living a completely miraculous existence, I would think that an atheist would have a much stronger argument than one from silence. I mean, think about what we have discovered in the last 100 years in archaeology that we knew nothing about 200 years ago. I mean, so many ideas have been overthrown, and let's say they find it next year. And again, I'm just not an expert in this field, so I have no way of. I don't want to persuade you from a field that I have no expertise in. But so much has been discovered in the last century. Texts, whether they're Gnostic Christian texts and Dead Sea, so much has been discovered recently that we thought was impossible. There was a time when Christians said that Matthew didn't misquote Isaiah, and it actually said in the original Hebrew that Hine habitula hara, behold, the virgin is pregnant, right? And they just said, no, our Bibles are intact. It really says Alma, right? Well, when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in the 1940s by a Bedouin, right? And we had the text, not all of it. We have all of Isaiah. We could say, there you are, bingo. And everyone who doubted us, you might want to consider rethinking us. So I would say this to you, that if we would find just artifacts in the dustbin of the Sinai Peninsula, I wouldn't be impressed with. That would be nothing to me, because after all, our infrastructure at the time was completely miraculous. So I don't expect to find anything, and I find not finding these things to be consistent with the story. I believe it's a story about a people in history. Look, let me do this. I don't want to like make up my religion. I mean, my faith. We're a people of a history that's possibly the most well-known history in the world. More than half the people on this planet believe that our Torah is a holy book. I'm not saying that should persuade you, but that you're going, all right, let's go back to the original. Like, let's stop with the nonsense that you find in the Christian Bible, which it is. It's worse than nonsense. Christian Bible is filled with a false shuffle, misquoting the Jewish scriptures. And let's just take a look at the original. After all, Dorothy might be wearing the ruby slippers and can make her way back to Kansas. After all, let's go back to the original.
Oh, right. So I think that's a perfectly fine way to approach it, but it's very hard for me to believe that if this story is true, I would expect to see that there are chariots in the Red Sea. We don't find any. I would expect to see pottery in the desert. We don't find any. I would expect to see that there's a sudden massive increase in the number of huts, houses, places where people live in the chosen land
So
during the
the
time
Red
period.
Sea, let me ask you this question. Okay? The Red Sea is the saltiest sea in the world, by far. I'm a diver. All divers who dove the Red Sea know that we have to add a few more pounds when we dive because there's so much salt in it, right? Highly corrosive, right? It's not like there's this wealth of stuff that survived 3,500 years in the saltiest sea on earth. I have to wear more weight to dive Hurghada, to dive the brothers Elephant Stone than I have to in the Caribbean. So it's highly corrosive. Now, I'm going to say this to you. I'm going to add this, but it's not a reliable source. But there have been people who have photographed chariot wheels on the bottom of the Red Sea. There are such photographs.
I believe that's the
Okay.
Reed Sea. I know of those examples, but I believe that the Reed Sea is where those are.
Yeah. So you see, what we're looking for, just as a point here, I'm just going to make a point, but I can't stand behind it because I didn't photograph it. It's like, but I think a point should be made. It's very hard to dive the Red Sea as compared to the Caribbean. Why? Because it's so deep. The trench is thousands of feet. So in order to dive it, you can't see the substrates as you could in typical dive sites. It's almost all of it's a wall dive, right? So you're looking for a place where there is some sort of pathway which is not that deep, or else, like, if you could part the sea, you still will be jumping off a cliff. That's the problem with diving the Red Sea. That's why you need like a minimum of 50 dives very recently to be able to dive that area of the world. But so there are, I'm going to say this. So there are photographs of wheels that some people claim are from that period that do move along a trench or the absence of a trench in a very specific place that I've passed over. Okay. What I want to convey is not that anyone should believe, because I don't know for sure who photographed it, and some of the people associated with it, I'm not quite 100% sure about. But I'm not persuaded by that. I don't think that's interesting. The text doesn't say look at archaeology. The Torah says, directs our attention, says look at your history, and that you've survived. That is the testimony. And I say this to you, if you, Tom, were ever to discover the Jewish people disappeared, as did all the other nations of the world, they lost their national identity, except for the Arabs. All biblical nations, they're gone. The Arabs were preserved because they have a covenant with God as well. But the Viscofs, where are they today? They're gone. Where are the Yevusim, the Canaanites? We know these names, was mentioned in the Bible, but their national identity is gone. If the Jewish people, I say this to you, were ever to disappear, you should take the Torah and throw it in the garbage where it would properly should be. The Torah is saying you'll be an eternal nation. People will be able to look at you and know. So it is true. That's why I say from the get-go, I don't want to mischaracterize the Jewish people, Jewish faith, and our claim and what gives us strength to persevere. I don't want to tell you it's archaeology. I want to tell you what the Torah says, that the Jewish people are an eternal nation. And even during the difficult times, Leviticus 26, verse 42, 43, 44 especially, one day you'll turn back to me and I will bring you home. You'll be few in number. And so the Torah is saying, look at that. Torah is not saying look for other things. Now, do we have the Tomb of the Patriarchs in Hebron, where Torah says, yeah, we do. Do we have a Temple Mount? Yeah, we do. And do Arabs and Jews both have a history, a collective memory of these places? Yeah, we do. So that's nice, but that's not our position. So I don't want to set up tell you this is why we believe in it. And I don't think, if you say you would be persuaded by finding relics of the past, fine. But the Torah says nothing about this. So I kind of be inventing a religion if I said that to you. So I'm just going to answer you as best as I can. But no, do not expect to find the Egyptians bragging about their destruction. And don't think the Assyrian Empire will brag about their destruction during the time of Sancherib, during the 14th year of Hezekiah's reign. It's something that, and don't expect the Syrians to brag about the destruction of their nuclear power plant in 2007. Okay.
Thank you. We have some questions from the audience, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Logan Fisher asks, can you ask about his position on the historicity of the Exodus and the Bible in general? What is like how much of the Torah do you think is historically accurate? The world global flood, 6-day creation, those kinds of things.
Oh, okay. That's a good question. When Jewish people talk about the world being 5,782 years, we don't mean the age of the earth. We have no idea how old the earth is. And we're just really happy and excited that scientists would discover more and more and keep adjusting that number, tell us about the age of the universe. We find that fascinating. I'm not the spokesman for the Jewish people, but I can surely tell you about Jewish people I know. We are dating from Adam. we are dating these from the time that where history began of the human race. We're not talking about like how old the Earth is, 4 billion years old, or the age of the universe. I don't know exactly what the number is, say 14 billion years old. There are, incidentally, and I'd encourage you to have on Professor Gerald Schroeder, who's an MIT physicist, and he wrote books on this. And Genesis and the Big Bang is very popular. These are people who could speak to this subject more. So, but
Could you say again what was his name?
Gerald Schroeder. He's one of the few
Thank you.
people I know who actually did his bachelor's, master's, and PhD all at MIT. So these are real experts in this stuff. And when he talks about this, he's a really bright guy, and it's not my field. But yes, so that's one point. I know I might offend people. I think young Earth creationists are making a very big mistake. And the reason why there's nothing compelling about it is because it doesn't make sense scientific. It just doesn't make sense. Moreover, there's no reason to believe that the 6 days of creation were 24-hour periods. I mean, after all, the first thing that God created is light. Now, what we know about discoveries of the 19th century, in the early 19th century, by a Jew, not a strong believer, I don't think, was that light plays a very big role in time, and they're intimately connected. The reason why it's perplexing the Torah will begin with the creation of light is because the sun wasn't created till day 4. So what was the basis there? It was evening, it was morning. So whatever it is, it's not 24 hours. It has nothing to do with the Earth's rotation around the sun, right? So we're not speaking to that. We're only speaking from the creation of Adam and moving forward. And, maybe it's a coincidence, but the prehistoric period essentially begins a little more than 6,000 years ago. And we're living in a special time. But all of it, unless there's some reason in the text that I wouldn't take it literally. I mean, when the text God says, I hovered over you like, with my wings, doesn't mean that God's a chicken. So obviously there are some texts that are not supposed to be taken literally, and you could tell from the context. But otherwise, global flood, and therefore every person is a descendant of 8 people. And just to make the point, we would expect if there was a global flood, we would just expect, we can't be sure of it, but we would expect that other nations, other people, not just the Jews, would have some record of this, right? If there was a flood that 8 people survived on a ship, if that happened, what we would expect to discover is that everyone's talking about this, not just the Jews. If the Torah was the only record of that, we would say, well, why didn't anybody else? Like, everybody's a survivor of that. And in fact, what we discover in cultures far and near is that they talk about, it's not the exact same story. On faith, we believe that our Torah is the precise record of event, based, of course, in our trust in a national revelation. So yeah, I do believe it. I'm an Orthodox Jew. I believe that the Torah is a holy book for sure.
Gotcha. Johann Pretorius asks, does God want us to kill other people for the land? I think referring to Old Testament commandments to kill certain groups.
Well, so there was a time when God made it very clear that the children of Israel were to go into the land, and that any nation that's there should clear out of the way, get out of the way. And in Deuteronomy 20, they're told, they're given time and told that now the children of Israel are returning. In fact, there was one nation, there were 7 nations in the land at the time. There's one nation, the Gergoshim, that actually left. They fled. So in fact, that was the case. But the element that's very important is that event. We're not there now, but we have some idea about it. Is that it confines the Jewish people to, at that point in history, at that time, under those circumstances, if people went to war with you, instead of relinquishing the land of Israel to the people whom God gave it to, then the Jewish people would destroy their enemies. But what that does for us is it's a constrictor, meaning that we can never do that, ever do that again. So we see that as an event in history, which is part of our history, that was a one-time moment history that only then, and therefore it acts as a constrictor that we can never engage in that practice again. We can't go around killing people to get to Florida. We can't go to any other land at any other time in history. But yes, it's a part of the history, but not to be repeated again. It's just a constrictor for us.
Charles and Solo asked a similar question about, in the Bible, it condones slavery, the buying and selling of people as property. Was it immoral for a God to authorize such activity, or was it moral because God said so?
Right. So slavery was a wonderful institution. And before you drop the mic, let me explain that. When we talk about slavery, that means an eved is a slave in Hebrew. We don't mean a black man in 1840 in Alabama. That was disgusting. That was sin. Slavery was a fabulous, vital institution for the ancient world. Now, I need to explain this, because what does it mean to be a slave in the Torah? So very frequently we're using the same word, slave, but we mean something totally different. So today, if you wanted to live somewhere, you can just move to another part of the United States. You can get a job, right? Then you can rent an apartment. And what's really nice is if somebody messes with you, you can call the police. If someone harasses you, you can get a lawyer. If it's an interstate issue, the FBI might get involved. You're protected as an American citizen. In the ancient world, this didn't exist. What protected you was your family. That's all you had. And incidentally, what I am doing here is I am using I'm using the most difficult example, because much of slavery had to do with an indentured servant, people who just had no money, people who stole and had to repay a debt and didn't have it, so they had to work it off. So I'm not doing that. I'm actually not referring to those people right now. So I'm looking at the most difficult element of slavery. But again, what the Torah meant. Okay, so I'm ignoring most of it. Was that someone stole from you, they couldn't pay you back, someone they had no money, they worked off their debt. We're going to not talk about that now. In the ancient world, what protected you was your family. That was it. It was your family. It was your clan. It was your tribe. If you didn't have that, you were dead. There was no 911. You couldn't get on the phone, or in Israel 101. You can't do that. So now what happens if you didn't have a family? Well, there's a method to join a family, and that is to become an eved. And what an eved means is that you're joining a family that's not biologically connected to you. You are enjoying all the benefits of the family, sustenance, but also receiving all the challenges that being part of the family is. So you do join a family that's not yours. You have the benefits, but you have the responsibilities of a family. The Torah has in it many conditions of what you can do with a slave, what you can't do with a slave. And there's so many. If there's one pillow in the house, guess who gets it? Not you, but the slave does. Guess who eats first? The slave. But the slave becomes a member of the family. Remember Genesis chapter 15, when Abraham is told by God that he's going to have an eternal nation out of him. At that moment in Abraham's life, he was childless. And Abraham said, well, who do you mean? Oh, you must mean Eliezer, my slave, my Eved, the Damascene. And God said, no. He's not going to inherit you. So slave was family. Very often there was a problem where people just didn't have anyone to marry their daughters to, because they were afraid what their husband might do with their estate. So they would free their slave to marry their daughter. The slave was the person you trust. He was a part of the family. And the problem in the Torah is that slaves didn't want to go free. They wanted to say, I love you. I love my master. Now, no doubt, fact, we're sure of this, there are many people who abuse the system. Just as there are physicians who abuse a system and molest their patients, people can abuse a system and did, and the Torah has provisions for that. But slave meant that you joined a family and that was a financial exchange. You then had the responsibilities of the family and you enjoyed the protection of the family and all the benefits of the family. Kol misha koine eved koine rabbi. Whosoever acquires a slave has acquired a master, because there's so many responsibilities to caring for him that was associated. Now, this, of course, has nothing to do with the slavery, or I don't say nothing, but little to do with the slavery that we know about in America's history and so on. It's not that. It's joining the family. Good question.
All right. Next question is, Johan asks, what percentage of Moses' DNA do you think is still in the Jewish culture?
If you could just stay a little louder.
What percentage of Moses' DNA is still in people today?
I don't know, but here I'd encourage people to, just look up priest, Kohen, priest DNA, do any kind of Google search on that, and there's like a ton of information on this. This has been rigorously tested, so I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not a scientist. I don't have that kind of background, but I do know that DNA is collected from Jewish people around the world. And that's why you can go to ancestry.com. You can go to, I think it's called 23andMe. People could swab the inside of their cheeks, find out where their Jewish ancestry comes from based on science. So what we find is that the science that we have access to today, which we didn't have access to 100 years ago, let alone 3,300 years ago, is consistent with what the claims, the fantastic claims found in Torah. There are no Christians today who could say my great grandmother was there when Jesus, fed thousands of people with fish or loaves of bread. But we have people that claim, who have descendants that pass that on, that we are descendants of this remarkable nation. Good question.
Grays asks, are there certain sects of Judaism that have equally as strange beliefs as some of the ones in Christianity, like Calvinism or the prosperity gospel, or there are many, especially in America, that have very strange beliefs? Are there similarly strange Jewish sects?
Right. So we have no crazy people among the Jewish people. I'm very proud of that. I am, and I have not, I've been very restrained in this conversation, but I am proud to say that you should consider at least converting to Judaism, because we produced no lunatics throughout our history. And for that, I am very, very pleased. Thank you very much. Yeah. What would it be like? Think for yourself. I mean, you should be pounding the door to convert to Judaism. I mean, imagine what it would be like to join a people that have produced no crazy people. Like, we're all just Nobel Prize winners, and we just blow the world away, and we're just upset that we haven't discovered yet that Newton was Jewish. So we're a little upset about that, and we'd like people to do a little bit more rigorous DNA. We have, after all, his skeletal remains buried in a church on the other side of the pond, or your pond, and we'd like to find out that he was a Jew. So the smartest guy who ever lived was Jewish, and that we would like. That's bothering us a little bit. It's bothering us that we only have, Einstein. There was a book written. It's called the Jewish Mystique. I think that's the name of the book. It's a book that essentially sets out that the four people who had the greatest influence over the way 20th century Westerners thought. So the four people, it was posited, I read this so many years ago, that had the greatest influence the way people thought were like who? So like Einstein, right? And Karl Marx and
Alan Turing.
No, and I'm just saying with that book, I'm not saying this is an absolutely true thing. So Freud, Marx, Einstein, Darwin, right? Those four people. This is what the book said. It's called The Mystique of the Jews, the Jewish Mystique. And I had a Rebbe, a teacher, I was a kid, saying, he thought it was strange. He said, "Isn't it interesting that 3 of them were Jewish and 1 was wrong?" But anyway, so no, we have no crazy people. We're all perfectly normal. I should say this. We've had, some denominations that have arisen in recent years that are consistent with the Enlightenment movement and so on. But all of Orthodox Judaism, and that phrase, that coined term, which we didn't come up with, someone else did, German, just which is traditional Judaism, we all believe the same thing. So that's very different than, at the Council of Trent, the Catholic Church stated, I thought intelligent, this is the longest, council of the Catholic Church, and anti-reformists. They said, you don't want a pope, but you're going to have 1,000 popes. And I thought it was very, very insightful of the Catholic Church. So what you find in Christianity is the most highly variegated religion in the world, where you have people who are Calvinists who believe that there's nothing you can do, Tom. If you were pre-selected for salvation, you're fine, but the atonement is limited. It's insane. There's nothing remotely resembling it. So I think if I can tweak the question, so all Jews who are called Orthodox, we don't have like a single union as the Reform does, have 13 principles, core principles of faith. And we all agree on that. So we may have different political views. We may have voted for different presidents. But our core 13 principles of faith are the same. We don't have the kind of variances that you find in Protestant Christianity, where you have a charismatic movement, a movement that began a little more than a century ago, or Calvinism, which is really an outgrowth of Augustinian thinking. And we don't have none of that kind of stuff. We all believe the same thing in Orthodox Judaism. We all believe that. It doesn't mean there's different nuances of what exact, but it's the same. It's far more monolithic that you would find in any other orthodoxy, certainly in Christianity.
Johann asks if you think Adam and Eve are real people and that we all descended from two individuals.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
All right, that was a short answer. That was a good one.
I'll just say this. I shouldn't do this because I'm not an expert in this field, as I said earlier, but like when did cities begin? When did civilization begin? If human beings like you and me, I just want to make that, if people have been around for 200,000 years, well, let's cut that in half to 100,000 years. You would expect to find cities, love letters, people didn't fall in love 25,000 years ago. I don't know. So it just is very consistent with, this is really the beginning of civilization, Thank you. Yeah, I do. I'm an Orthodox Jew, so my beliefs are very down the middle. I'm not anywhere unusual, except that I have a high view of the Jewish people that other Jews may not share with me.
Grace asks, how do you interpret the end of Daniel 11? The prophecy stops being accurate at 1140 when describing Antiochus and the general resurrection at a time of his death. Who's the king in 4045?
So I can't hear you very well, but the resurrection at the end of days, let me just put it together, is a promise that the faithful will be restored. And Daniel in the book of Daniel, what comes into view, my favorite prophet, is 4 great kingdoms, Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Edom, which in our faith is Rome and the church and all that. And then ultimately that will be destroyed, and there'll be a 5th kingdom, and that's the kingdom of the Messiah. That's what comes into view. And then, of course, Daniel wraps it up with, there are many who sleep in the earth, which is a euphemism for our dead, who will rise for everlasting life, and others for everlasting contempt and damnation. Thank you for that question.
Gotcha. Grays asked, what do you think happened to Jesus? If Jesus was not the actual Son of God, is he in hell now?
You think that's possible? You think? You think he just might not be the Son of God? I don't know. All right. So what do I think happened to Jesus? So the problem with, I'm not going to say anything that will blow anyone away. The thing about Jesus is that we have no non-Christian historical stuff about Jesus from the first century. The first non-Christian literature about Jesus is Pliny the Younger in 112 and Tacitus 114. So it's so everybody, when we're saying, well, what do we think the real Jesus is if he existed, is using a methodology that's kind of soft. It's speculative. There is a verisimilitude that we're looking for, but you're presupposing a lot, that this was a Jewish guy from the Upper Galilee, and then you would expect that what would be consistent is you had some fellow in the first part of the first century who came from the Galilee, a fishing area, and was a Jew, was a religious Jew. So you have to like throw all those postulates in there. And then he probably went around saying that the world is coming to an end and the empire was coming to an end, which would explain. I talk about this in volume 1 of Let's Get Biblical. I mean, so if we have to have presuppositions. If we presuppose that the Romans executed him by crucifixion, if we can just have that as axiomatic, which I'm just saying if he was, so then we know why the empire would have crucified him, and that's for treason against the empire. We can then extrapolate that he's saying the empire is going to fall. That would then follow very smoothly. And that means he's running around saying that the empire is good. This is the Roman Empire, the greatest empire the world's ever known. And the empire they were a little uneasy about people saying that the empire is going to come and there's going to be an apocalyptic eschatology. And perhaps we encounter this in Mark 9 and 13, where we are told that Jesus is saying that there are people who are just standing here that will not taste of death before they see the full power of this redemptive process happening. This generation will not pass away. These are very famous passages. And the question is that how would passages found like that creep their way into the Christian Bible? Well, it's quite possible. It's just this is an informed speculation. I mean, just as a point, because I want you guys to understand, when we look at the Gospels, we can know a lot about what these Christians, whoever wrote them, what they thought, what were their Christologies, right? That's what we know. To know what Jesus really did, we're presupposing a lot. So I think it's very likely. I think the Nazareth part, the fact that they're claiming that Jesus was born in Nazareth, born in Bethlehem, but they're trying to get him to Nazareth, that he's Jesus of Nazareth, not Jesus of Bethlehem. They're working too hard to get him into Bethlehem, because Matthew and Luke, which are the only two books in the New Testament that are claiming that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, are working too hard and have completely contradictory plot devices for their infancy narrative. So it would seem that he really did come from a little hole in the wall called Nazareth. And they try to get him born in Bethlehem because King David was born in Bethlehem. And so that would point to a historical person. And then, of course, I mean, I don't know how much you want me to go into this. Then you look at our sources. So if you look
to clarify, the question was, I think, like, if Jesus in the New Testament did all the things that he said in the New Testament or claimed to do those things, would that make him a heretic and by extension make him so he'd go to hell? Is he in hell? That's the question.
No, well, whatever that is, he said that, and I don't think he did. I think these are very later Of course, these are later developments, because you find some of the highest Christology in the Book of John. Like, why isn't there a Q source, which is, I'm sure, much older than Mark? Why is there anything remotely resembling that? There's nothing even in the Q source of Jesus doing miracles. That's a very important source. So this is all we're having. These are thought experiments. But yeah, if you've seen me, if you've seen the Father, I and the Father are one. I mean, he's claiming some element of divinity in the Book of John, the last of the Gospels. That would be complete heresy. Now, him being the Son of God, he was the Son of God, but I'm also the Son of God, and so are you. We are created in God's image. You see, so in Neoplatonic language, son of God meant one thing. In the Greek mind, son of God meant you were divine, like Hercules and Caesar Augustus. In Tanakh, Bonematem la Hashem Elokechem, Deuteronomy 14, verse 1. You are children of the Lord your God. We're created in the image of God. So Jesus was a son of God, but no more, no less than I am. And God called upon him to be faithful to Hashem. And I hope for his sake that he was loyal to Hashem. But these are questions about angels dancing on the head of a pin. But I hope for his sake that what we find in the later iterations of Christian literature of the first century do not map onto anything he, heaven forbid, would have said or thought. But this is all complete speculation, Tom. Anyways, thank you so much for having me on.
All right, you're right. So there's 3 questions left if you have time, but if not, that's totally okay.
Let's take the best, like whatever.
All right, sure. Johan asks, what would change you from Judaism? What would convince you that Judaism was wrong, if you found something?
What would convince you that Judaism is wrong?
Yeah.
Is that the question?
Yep. What would make you convert?
Very simple. I expressed this earlier. And I say this to everyone, if my nation, a very tiny people, 1/4% of the world's population, if we disappear, then take the Torah and throw it in the garbage. It's worthless. That's the big one. That the nation of Israel is an eternal people. That is the marker given in Torah, and the nations are called to keep your eye on the Jewish people. Now, there's more. The Jewish people to return to land, but we're just enjoying that view now, that the Jews would return. The nations will go to. I mean, think how crazy this is. People who are doubting faith. Here we have prophets that lived thousands of years ago by any measure. And they said, look, you're going to be exiled for a very long time, but one day you're going to return back to the land of Israel. And then nations around you are going to go to war with you. I mean, this is very explicit in Zechariah 8, 12, 13, 14, Ezekiel 38, 39. I mean, this is not like my interpretation. You're going to return to the land and you're going to have an army. Nations will attack Israel over Jerusalem. And then God will strengthen the children of Israel, be like the angel of the Lord of hosts, and defeat them. I mean, these are insane predictions. There's no parallel to this in the annals of history. So yes, those are things to keep your eye on. And the land would give forth its fruit once the nation returns back to the land. These are the things. These are highly falsifiable claims, not scientific predictions that can only be verified thousands of years later, but an ongoing prediction. The nation will survive. My friends, watch my people, the nation of Israel. Watch our history. Keep your eye on that. That's where the light comes from. That's why we're called a witness people. Thank you, Tom.
Yep. And last 2 questions are related. They're asking, why can't we observe the supernatural? And does that concern you? And why don't any miracles happen today? Why did they stop happening?
Right. So that I could take an easy route on, or a more interesting route. And let's do a little bit. So imagine for a moment we have to do a thought experiment. What would happen today if only Judaism could produce miracles and no one else could? Now, I'm not saying claims of miracles. I'm talking about empirical miracles that everyone could see, right? What would happen?
More people would believe in Judaism.
We'd all join Judaism and everyone would lose their free will. Everyone would lose their free will. So it's vital that whatever is happening in Judaism could happen in any religion. So the numinous, ecstatic experience that Jewish people feel when we pray, when we study, is experienced by other religions, both Eastern and Western religions. They're all having it. It's not just Jews who are willing to die for what they believe. Everyone's willing to do that. So it's critical in Torah that people have free will. Christianity rejects that man has genuine free will. Man is a sinful creature, Romans chapter 3. There's nothing you can do to save yourself. But that's contrary to the Torah. So God always is, before you place life and death, good and evil, you must choose life. And therefore, it's just, if other religions can produce miracles, then Judaism has to do it as well. If they can't, then we can't. And that temperature was dialed down at the beginning of the Second Temple period, at the very end of the prophetic period at the time of Zechariah, Malachi, and Haggai, not in that order. But these are the three prophets that were during the Persian Empire. To go further, rabbis entreated God to reduce the attraction to idolatry. God then dials that down, and then everything is dialed down together. So the reason we don't is because if you who are watching me now, listening to my voice right now, if an angel appeared to you as an angel appeared to Gideon, you'd lose your free will. You would go, where do I sign up? You would get on the next flight to Israel and join the Jewish people. But then you would also lose your free will. So the key is that you need the partial pressure, using a diving term. It's really the partial pressure has to be the same. As long as you dial in the partial pressure correctly, you're going to be okay. I don't care if you're doing nitrox, if you're doing helium, whatever it is that you just got to keep that partial pressure in the right place. Everything's got to be the balance. Today, we're living in a time where Hashem is saying the following to you. I've given you the information. You have it now. Here is the word. This is my promise to you. Yes, you're going to be exiled, but you're going to return and you're going to come back to Jerusalem. Nations will try to stop you, even destroy you. Jacob's trouble, Jeremiah 30, verse 7. But I'm going to redeem you. And the children of Israel, when we look at the land, think of what Mark Twain saw when he came to the land of Israel in the 19th century. He wrote Innocents Abroad. I'd encourage you to read it. And he wrote about nothing here. Nothing grew here. People had good reason to grow things here, but nothing would grow here. But the land is giving forth its fruit so much in such abundance that Israel is a chief exporter in the Middle East of fruits and vegetables all over. So we see that God kept his promise. He has an amazing credit rating. Are there mysteries in Judaism? Absolutely. There just can't be contradictions. Okay, so great question. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been going for about an hour and a half. Really appreciate you coming on. It was a great conversation. Do you want to give any links or references where people can find more about your work?
Sure. So surely follow my channel, Tovia Singer on YouTube. The website of my organization, Outreach Judaism, is outreachjudaism.org. Please buy my books. No, that was silly. I was being silly. Please buy my books. I have to pay the rent. Please do something. Help a Jew out. I gave you a whole an hour and a half. I'm not worth anything. So I'm kidding, but please do. It's not so expensive. Buy it. Not so buy it. I'll give you a good price. You, me, we'll talk after the show. Kidding. Outreach. If these jokes are too complicated for the rest of the audience, I'll talk slower. Outreachjudaism.org is the website. And so the books I think are helpful. And I don't think there are about 1,000 videos. I don't really know the number. It's a large number, a large prayer people are studying. And I'm very grateful to be able to share this with you. I'll confess this to you, Tom, that I think this is my first conversation about what we talked about with an atheist in my life. And I've been interviewed on many shows by atheists, but never actually talked about this. So I'm glad that I had the opportunity to do that with you today. Thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. There's a joke that I was reminded of. It was, I'm writing a book on reverse psychology. Please don't buy it.
So
Thanks,
how
man.
did I do? Tell me, how did I
Great.
do? Not bad, right?
Great.
For a Jew, not too bad, right?
Yeah.
This could have been a nightmare, right?
Yeah.
A tank, but no. I think your career is going to take off from here. This is going to be unbelievable. Anyways, it was great having me on. I say to all of you, really, I'm grateful that you took the time to listen to this, and I enjoy this conversation thoroughly with you. So, all right,
Thank
shalom.
you.